name is Anand. I work at Investment and I lead the testing in the investment team. So we would like to start with the question, right? So what I want to talk today is about modern testing. The first thing about modern testing is there is nothing that is modern about it, right? And for that matter, there is nothing that is related to testing as well. Right. So modern testing, not that much modern and not that much about testing. And you are going to realize that in the next 20 minutes when we're going to speak more about it. So modern testing is something based on the work by Alan Page and Brent Jensen. So why I have said that that is something which they have codified is these are things which you might already be knowing. These are things which were written down based on the principles of, say, lean thinking, agile manifestos, and all those things. But what Alan and Brent has done is they have put a format to this. They have put a list of principles which we will go through, which I feel, in my experience, has helped me a lot and many other teams that I work with in changing the way in which we are thinking about testing. Okay, and that's the reason why we call it as a modern testing. So the goal of the whole modern testing is that it is to accelerate the achievement of shippable quality. Pretty straightforward, right? When do we ship the items? When it achieves a pretty good quality. And how do we accelerate it? That's what the modern testing is all about. So how do we accelerate it and how do we achieve this? We're going to look at that based on the principles of modern testing. And there are 7 principles, each of which we will go through. Let's talk about the first one, right? Principle one is priority is improving the business. It's pretty straightforward, right? But then this is something which at least I have seen in various organizations that I was part of is when someone asks the QA team, what value are you adding? You can go beyond that and ask the product team or ask the people who are actually building the business on are you actually building the right thing or not? Right? That is something as QA you can go ahead and ask. So your priority is improving the business and you should be talking within your circles and outside your circles within the organization on how you are adding the value. So typically what I've seen is you get a requirement from a product, VSA or whoever that is, right? And your job is to find test cases on top of that and make sure that all is fine. But how many of us go back, ask the product, is this what actually that you are trying to build, right? Or have you ever thought about whatever you are doing, right? Can I tie that back to a revenue stream that the business is achieving, right? So there are ways in which we can do that, but then these are things which are not leveraged enough, is what I feel. Okay, so the first principle, like I mentioned, is the improving the business, pretty straightforward. So second one says we use the models like lean thinking and the theory of constraints to identify and mitigate the bottlenecks. So anybody here familiar with theory of constraints? So basically, theory of constraints is something that came out of a book written by Eddie Goldblatt. The book name is Goal. It's a fascinating concept. You must be aware of that. It's used in manufacturing. It works perfectly well in IT as well. So basically, a theory of constraints is that in any process that you have, there will be a bottleneck, right? Doesn't matter whatever the process is, even if it's a coffee machine, right? You are trying to go and get a coffee from the coffee machine, that machine will have a bottleneck. Your velocity is going to increase only if you are going to work on the bottleneck, right? So most of the times, what I've seen is in the discussions that we have with the business or other things, QA comes up as a bottleneck, right? Have you ever seen that? Have you ever heard someone saying straight out that QA is a bottleneck? You might not have heard in those terms, but maybe you would have heard something like, well, we could have released this much earlier if not for the big regression cycle. If only QA could do that. Or we had these many stories spilled over to the next sprint because QA couldn't test, right? I'm pretty sure at least some of you might have heard that. Now, what I suggest is QA is a bottleneck. And I think the first thing that we have to be accepting is that that is true, right? There's no point in denying that. But the funny fact in that is, though QA is the bottleneck, the reason for that lies outside QA, not within. So unless you know something like the theory of constraints and how to identify the bottlenecks and figure out where the problem is, you will not be able to convince the people outside your team, right? That though we are the bottleneck, you have to fix it elsewhere. One of the most common things that I've seen is the build time, right? So when I work with the team, right, I see that for a major release or major fix or something like that, people just keep waiting for the next build to land so that they can test. And the build takes a long time, right? So when we ask the team, the QA team, it's like not our area, right? That's probably developers area, or probably even worst case, there's something like DevOps team now, so it's the DevOps area. Why the build is taking that much time is something which we don't care about as a QA. My point is we should be very much taking care of that. If you look at the quality assets, right, as the wonderful of the Jenny Weinberg has said, quality is a value to someone, right? And I believe there are two types of quality. One is internal and one is external. And in my experience, what I've seen is we focus too much on the external. I think earlier in the earlier sessions, Prashant also mentioned is we have to collaborate with other teams and see how we can improve the internal quality. And what does the internal quality look like? The simple definition that I have for internal quality is you look at the friction in the whole software process from the time that your requirement is written to when it is getting delivered to the end customer. You look at that and see which all teams have that friction. So one example is the unit testing, right? So in earlier days when someone asked me, why don't developers write those unit tests? And then I would be saying like, you will not developers write it. They're never gonna write it. And we're pretty lazy guys. And they're not gonna do it. It's the response that I used to say. But now if someone asks me why they don't write unit tests, the first thing that I tell them is, why don't you go and ask them? Actually, you might not know how to write that because someone has to teach them. Number two, it's not easy to write, right? They might have a framework, but they don't know how to take the most advantage of that. The third one is they might be writing all these things, but it takes a long time for executing it. Now, in all these three things, as QA, we can help. Like most of you would have written automation, most of you know test NG, JUnit, and all those things. So why don't we go ahead, talk to them, help them fix it? I'm not saying that you should go and write the unit test. No, that's not my point. But then you can improve the scope of things that you're working on. You just don't stay within the cocoon of testing, right? You get out of that, talk to the other team, see what the problem is. So whatever I mentioned about unit testing, right, that goes true for the deployment as well. How many of you know the deployment process of your application? How does the app that you testing is get put out in front of the user? How does it get uploaded to the server? Who does it? What happens within that? How much time it is taking for the deployment? So all of these things, right? All of these are something which you can look into and improve. So because you need to identify that bottleneck, and bottleneck might be unit testing, might be deployment, and all those things. So you need to have an awareness on those processes as well if you have to fix it. So that's principle number two. So whatever you learn once, that doesn't stay with you. I mean, you can hold on to that for some time, but not for long, right? And the thing that I want to focus on this principle three is the last part, that we are not a safety nets to capture the failure. Goes back to the earlier point on what is the role of QA, right? So time and again, what we have seen is QA has become kind of a safety net, right? Safety net in the sense you, all of, I don't know how many of you have seen circus. There is an item called trapeze in circus where people jump from the top and there's a safety net below, right? So safety net is there to catch if the person who is doing the trapezium item, if they're not doing it right, they might fall down and it's there to catch. So we have become something like that. And I don't know how or when it happened, but along the path, I think we started thinking in a way where we feel that that safety net should be strengthened even more and more, right? Rather than telling the person who is doing the trapezium item to get his item fixed, to get his act fixed, we are saying that the safety net should be automated, the safety net should be strengthened, and all those things. But what we should be looking at is we should be telling that the correctness of the code, whoever is authoring that particular code, in this case, if it is a developer, we have to interact with the people. We have to influence probably most of the people, and most of them might be outside QA as well. And if you ask me, what is the biggest strength that the QA person should be having? I would say it is influencing, right? You should know the technical part, definitely you should. But then all of those are kind of enablers for you to go and make a discussion with other parties in software development, right? And this is this is very critical when you grow up the ladder, right? I know there might be you might be working in a service company, product company, doesn't matter. You will have to at the end of the day, if you do care about quality, right? And there's a difference between testing and quality. The only way in which we can judge the quality of the software is from the customer side. Now, that's not to say that QA cannot do that. QA can be a proxy for some time, but at the same time, we shouldn't mistake ourselves that we are the customers, right? And what does this mean? Is that when you are implementing something, you have to have mechanisms to know how the customer is going to use that product. Right? You cannot rely on product team or the development team of work. At the end of the day, the quality of the application is something that the customer is going to use. Like in the first keynote session, they are, you might have the most brilliant idea in your head, but if the UX is not good enough, no bugs, but generating no revenue, which one would you prefer as a business? As a business, you would prefer the first one. A couple of bucks are fine as long as the money is coming in, right? So you have to probably check something which you have learned already, where we typically look for zero bucks policy and all those things. But then you have to understand that the true value, that customer is the only one who can actually judge the true value of the application. The sixth principle is very easy. You should be using data extensively. So in simple terms, it means you instrument the hell out of your application, right? You add in a lot of instrumentation in place so that you can go into say something like New Relic or say something like heat map analysis and see the features which you are putting in, how is it getting used? So you can gather the data from that, come back here and see whether the testing that you have done, does it match with in the way the customer is actually using it, right? So there is a knowledge gap there if you, and this principle six can help you there, right? The last one, but then in the modern testing principles world, this is something that is very controversial because this says that if you do our job well, right, we expand the abilities within the team on how to test, which in other words means in the long term, if you're doing your job right, then maybe, just maybe, you might not be requiring that as a test specialist, right? Because you have enabled the team as such to make sure that they can build a quality application without your support. Now, most of the people read this as okay, this is like advising teams to get away with the testers. No, that is not the case. Testers are still required, and testing is obviously there. But then, in my experience, what I've seen is I work with multiple companies, and in most of the cases where I have found satisfaction is when I could move out of a team to a different one and knowing that the other team that I moved out of, they can still deliver quality applications, right? Even without me. So typically when you leave a team or an organization, they might feel pretty good at what you're doing. They would feel that they're losing someone who is pretty good in the domain, pretty good in testing. But then you follow these principles, you make the change in the team, and then if you're moving now, they'll be grateful for you. They will be grateful that you have built a team, you have changed the culture, right? So that's principle seven. Those are seven principles we have in modern testing. And there is a model on this. This is only the first row of that. So again, this is created by Alan only. And again, none of this, whatever I've said here, right? It's not a Bible, Quran, right? You don't have to literally take it. And we expect that you read these things You understand what it stands for and see whether it fits your context, and then imply. Then you can apply it. So this quality culture transition guide is what this is known as. So basically, the way in which you can start is you can see in which category you fall in. Is it in the chaos, is it in the growing, or a competitive or optimizing? And we have multiple capabilities as well. Testing graph is one such capability. So you can see there is a good explanation to see identify yourself on this one. So this is only one line, but then this is how the whole guide looks like. The second last thing that I want to talk to you about is all of this is good, but how does this help me as a tester? Right? In fact, from what I have mentioned, I was saying that maybe you will be moving out of the team as well. So at the end of the day, how does it help me as an individual or in my career? So what I have seen in my experience is if you try to apply any of these, all of these seven principles, right? Not maybe not all seven, but at least a few of them, you get exposure to multiple areas, right? So when you are attending and you are, let's say, next interview, I hope there is no HR is around. But then if you're attending your next interview and someone is asking you, what impact did you get in the previous company? What do you know? The typical answer is Anup was saying earlier, I started with manual testing and then I went into automation, right? And then you say some technical stuff about testing and all those things. But instead of that, what you can probably say is, I have changed the way you raise a bill card release from say 1 week time to probably 3 days, right? I have cut down the build time. I have cut down the way in which the velocity of the release happens. And how I did that was by working with teams outside of QA. And by working with teams outside of QA, I got an exposure in multiple tools, be it release, be it coding, be it AWS infrastructure, whatever it is, right? So your surface area is increasing a lot. Or in other terms, you become a generalist, right? But you are a generalist who is specializing in testing. That's the kind of skills that people look for. All of you know Adam Scott. He's the author of something comic strip called Dilbert, right? So in his book, he has written this wonderful point that we try to be great at something most of the time, right? So if you let's say if we try to take automation as an example, we're trying to be great at automation testing, but then things that usually work out is instead of being great at one thing, right, if you can be good at multiple things, that is going to help you. And I can say that literally from my experience. You don't need to be really, really great at anything. When absolutely good if you are really great at something. But then we have to be pragmatic and understand that this is a large world. There will be very people who are very keen and who will be naturally gifted, who will be in the field. But then rather than competing there, right, if you can have multiple skills, if you can be good at multiple items, then the chances of your success will be much more regardless of your experience, be it 3 years or be it 12 years or be it 18 years. You can always bring in a change in an organization, but because you have to remember that there are people who are looking up to you, right? They are going to model after you. They are looking at, are you responding to that development leader who is pushing for more testing? They are looking at how you are conveying your points to them. Is it based on data or are you just shouting it out? Right. So these things just make a difference. Even if you think that no one is listening to it or no one is seeing, people are listening to it and they're going to come back. They're going to be do something similar when they become the leaders of next day. All right. With that, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.